and contained errors. Now, joining us from our Pretoria studio is Professor or Doctor, whichever one you would like to you'd like to call him, Somadoda Fikeni. He, of course, is a political analyst. Good to have you again, and nice to see you after the elections.
Good morning to your viewers and good morning to you.
Thank you very, very much. Now, acting spokesperson Phumla Williams said, now let's quote him, they are not taking the public protector to court, but want her report to undergo a judicial review. And don't you find that a little bit ambiguous? What do you think of that statement?
Well, I do think that they are trying to go straight to the issue of the separation of powers, or even the powers granted to the NPA. Perhaps they might even be saying they want to review the kinds of powers, assumed or real, which NPA has. But of course, it's a very high-risk strategy, because in the review process, you may actually have a situation where the contents of the Nkandla report go on trial.
Doesn't it feed that the already existing perceptions on how the public protector is persecuted?
Certainly, this will add to those who are already feeling that there's not been all readily available cooperation with the public protector on this matter. They'll take this as one other step to obstruct or even diminish that particular role. And this follows very quickly after the parliamentary committee which was set up, and again which had to abandon the work because they said they didn't have time. So here, each one of these particular obstacles may be perceived negatively, and even more so if the review process doesn't yield the results that the cluster ministers would like to see.
Do you think that, for instance, this is likely to discourage democratic institutions?
Not necessarily. It may not discourage them, but it will simply make their work a lot more difficult, and at times it might take even longer because they would have to be as thorough. They may even involve all kinds of lawyers before they release any report that they may release.
All right. What does this say about our democracy and South Africa's institutions?
Can you repeat your question again?
What do you think an instance like this says about South Africa and its democratic institutions?
Well, I do think that we do have quite a vibrant democracy, with the institutions of democracy practicing their autonomy. But at the same time, when you have cases as difficult as this one, targeting the first citizen of the nation, that is where you begin to realize how difficult the interpretation of the separation of roles might be. Remember that the executive had already complained about the courts or the judiciary in terms of the separation of powers. Our democracy, therefore, is quite alive, and the institutions are showing greater degree of autonomy.
Just to end off this issue, I mean, when we look at Nkandla, it really doesn't seem to be going away. It seems to constantly be around. In this new parliament, what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I do think that it might go back to Parliament at some point and be debated. And of course, I don't think the security cluster ministers may be that comfortable, or the ANC, with the matter debated in Parliament, especially with the new players like EFF who may make a meal out of this. But in the final analysis, I think the numbers with the ruling party having the majority will prevail if it goes to Parliament.
It just again brings into question Chapter 9 institutions, and I mean, does something like this not threaten them, not almost be a thorn in the side of their integrity?
Without any doubt, there are challenges facing the Chapter 9 institutions, which are supposed to be guidance of our democracy. Whenever they are faced with such a critical challenge, how those are decided may actually erode their power or may affirm them, depending on how the matter is handled.
Yeah.
But the Nkandla report, as it were, or the Nkandla issue, it's most likely going to have a life like your arms deal, which lives longer than even the administration itself.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, this is taxpayers' money, and we're seeing how much is being spent of our money on this particular issue now. And I think that that's worrying for South Africans.
Without any doubt, the legal fees that are spent on most of your government-related cases are the kinds of amounts which may cause the taxpayers all of the concern, especially during these hard economic decisions which have to be made. That is where sometimes you need decisiveness, because in the Nkandla report, we should separate two things. One, which might be looking at the powers given to the public protector, whether the public protector has overstepped those powers, but also at the very core of that is a simple fact that there was a project which was meant to be 27 million, which has now escalated to 246 million as projected. And that in itself, I think, to ordinary people is the issue that needs focus, whether the people who were consultants did not overprice the project. And the second one is the one of whether everything listed there is actually catering for security, or those were extras which were not needed. I think that is the core which we ought to say we learn from this Nkandla experience, and therefore in future, how do we avoid that? And that is what I think citizens would be waiting for. All other technical issues as to the roles of the public protector, the separation of roles between the executive and the judiciary and the other Chapter 9 institutions at another level is not of immediate concern to the citizens.
All right, let's leave it there. Interesting conversation. Professor Somadoda Fikeni talking to us from our Pretoria studios about the ministers revealing that it plans to order a legal review of the Nkandla report as it is contradictory.